Before we begin, a brief note. Tonight's conversation moves beyond politics and into culture, identity, faith, gender, media, and the way Americans see themselves. These topics can feel personal, even uncomfortable. The goal of this episode isn't to provoke, it's to reflect. If you're looking for a fight, this isn't that. If you're willing to think, stay with us.
There's something in the air in this country. It's not anger exactly. It's not hope either. It's uncertainty. You can feel it in small towns and big cities, in churches that are half full, in young men who don't know what strength means anymore, in parents trying to figure out what values even look like in a digital world. And we argue about policy, we argue about elections. But underneath all of that, something deeper is shifting. Are we losing something or shedding something? Tonight isn't about parties. It's about eras, about whether America is collapsing or transforming. And sometimes the only way to understand a moment like this is to step back from the noise and study the pattern. And that's what tonight is about. All right, it's Friday. And on Special Guest Friday, we slow the pace down. No crossfire, no shouting over each other, just one conversation, deeper than headlines. Tonight, we're stepping outside the daily political grind and looking at something bigger, culture. Not red versus blue, not elections, not policy battles, but the deeper shift happening underneath all of it. Joining me tonight is Dr. Rowan Mercer. Rowan was raised in the Midwest, Ohio-born, public school educated, and spent over 2 decades studying cultural sociology and media theory. She taught at the university level before stepping away from academia when she felt institutional spaces were becoming more ideological than inquisitive. Since then, she's worked independently, analyzing how identity, technology, faith, and social narratives reshape societies over time. She doesn't approach culture as partisan warfare. She studies patterns, cycles, shifts. And tonight, we're asking a simple but uncomfortable question. Is America declining or transitioning? Dr. Mercer, welcome to Data and Dissonance. All right, Rowan, let's start here. There's a word I keep hearing from people across the country, and it's not political, it's emotional. They say something feels off, not broken, not on fire, just off. You talk to parents, and they'll tell you their kids seem more anxious than they were at that age. You talk to men in their 30s and 40s, and they'll say they're unsure what strength even means anymore. You talk to churches, and they'll admit attendance is down, but online engagement is up. Communities feel digitally connected, but physically thinner. It's like confidence, collective confidence, shifted somewhere along the line. So I want to start big picture. From your perspective as someone who studies cultural cycles, did America lose confidence in itself? And if it did, when did that shift really begin? Was it economic, technological, institutional, or psychological? What are we actually looking at here?
That word you used, off, is actually more accurate than most political language I hear. When societies begin to transition between eras, the first symptom isn't collapse, it's disorientation. People can't quite articulate what's wrong because nothing appears visibly broken. The infrastructure is still standing, the economy is still moving, elections still happen, but the emotional architecture, the shared sense of direction, starts thinning. I don't believe America lost confidence in a dramatic sense. I believe America's confidence fragmented. For most of the 20th century, there was a dominant narrative. Progress was linear, institutions were stable, upward mobility was attainable, and identity was largely rooted in family, faith, and locality. That narrative created psychological stability. You didn't have to agree with everything. You just had to believe the system fundamentally worked. The shift began quietly in the early 2000s, but accelerated dramatically with 3 forces converging: digital identity, institutional distrust, and economic unpredictability. Social media changed the way we measure ourselves. Instead of being evaluated by community, we began performing for audience. At the same time, trust in institutions, government, media, academia, even churches began eroding. And when economic shocks stacked on top of that, particularly after 2008, people stopped assuming tomorrow would naturally be better. What you're sensing as off is a culture that no longer shares a unified story about itself. Some believe the country is in moral decline. Others believe it's finally correcting historical wrongs. Some think it's collapsing under global pressure. Others think it's reinventing itself. When there's no shared narrative, confidence doesn't disappear. It decentralizes. It becomes tribal. And that decentralization creates anxiety because humans are wired for belonging to something coherent. We aren't watching America lose confidence. We're watching it renegotiate identity in real time. And that process is always uncomfortable. And the question isn't whether we declined, it's whether a new cohesive story emerges or whether fragmentation becomes permanent.
Rowan, that's interesting, because what you just described doesn't sound like collapse. It sounds like drift. And I think that's what people struggle with. Collapse is loud. Collapse gives you something to fight. But drift feels subtle. It feels like waking up one day and realizing the ground shifted inch by inch and you didn't notice it happening. What really stood out to me was what you said about shared narrative, because growing up, and I'm not romanticizing it, but there was a general agreement about certain things. Work mattered, family mattered, faith mattered, country mattered. You could disagree politically, but there was still this underlying sense of we're on the same team. Now it feels like people don't even agree on what the team is. And here's where I want to go deeper with you. If digital identity fractured the shared story, if social media decentralized confidence into tribes, then are we raising a generation that doesn't anchor identity in place or purpose anymore, but in reaction? In other words, are young Americans building identity around what they're against instead of what they're building? And if that's happening, what does that do to long-term stability in a country like ours? Because that feels like more than discomfort. That feels structural.
That's a critical distinction, drift versus collapse. And you're right. Drift is harder to confront because it doesn't give you a single villain or a single event to rally around. To your question, yes, I do believe we are increasingly building identity through opposition rather than construction, and that shift has profound implications. Historically, identity was rooted in contribution. You were a farmer, a mechanic, a teacher, a mother, a veteran, a parish member. Identity was attached to function and proximity, what you did and where you belonged. Even political identity was secondary to those anchors. Digital culture inverted that hierarchy. Now, identity is often declarative rather than demonstrative. It's broadcast before it's lived. Instead of being known by what you build, you're known by what you signal. And signaling thrives on contrast. The algorithm rewards intensity, and intensity is most easily generated through opposition, outrage, critique, moral positioning. When a generation grows up in that ecosystem, opposition becomes a faster path to belonging than contribution. It is easier to declare what you reject than to build something that requires patience and effort. That doesn't mean young Americans lack depth or intelligence, but it does mean the incentive structures shaping them are different. The structural risk comes when identity is primarily reactive. Reactive identity requires a constant adversary. It must continuously define itself against something. That produces volatility, because once the opposition fades, the identity feels hollow. Long-term stability in any society depends on shared constructive projects. Families, businesses, churches, local institutions, civic groups. If identity shifts too far toward performance and away from participation, you don't get collapse overnight. You get thinning, thinner communities, thinner trust, thinner resilience. However, I would add this. Cultural cycles often overcorrect before they rebalance. When performance becomes exhausting, and we are approaching that point, there is often a renewed hunger for tangible meaning, for rootedness, for work that exists outside the screen. The danger isn't that young Americans are incapable of building. The danger is that we have not made building as visible or as celebrated, as reacting. And cultures tend to imitate what they reward. The question becomes, what are we choosing to reward right now?
That line right there, cultures imitate what they reward, that hits. Because if you look at what gets rewarded right now, it's visibility, it's virality, it's outrage, it's hot takes. It's who can cut the sharpest clip, not who can build the strongest foundation. And I think that's where a lot of the exhaustion comes from. You mentioned performance becoming exhausting, and I feel that. I think a lot of people feel that. There's this constant pressure to curate, respond, defend, signal. It's like we're all on stage, whether we ask to be or not. But here's where I want to pivot. When we talk about identity shifting from contribution to declaration, a lot of that conversation eventually lands on masculinity and femininity. Not in a combative way, but in a redefining way, because traditionally strength, responsibility, protection, nurture, those roles were clearer, maybe imperfect, maybe flawed in execution, but clearer. Now there's confusion, and not just politically, culturally. So let me ask you this. Are we witnessing a genuine evolution of gender roles in a modern society, or are we witnessing destabilization because the culture removed structure faster than it replaced it? And how do you tell the difference between healthy evolution and cultural disorientation?
That's one of the most emotionally charged areas of modern culture. But when you strip away the rhetoric, it becomes a question of tempo. Societies evolve. Gender roles have never been static. Economic shifts, wars, industrialization, technology, all of those have historically reshaped what men and women do and how they relate. So evolution itself is not destabilizing. In fact, adaptation is often necessary for survival. The destabilization occurs when pace outstrips integration. For most of the 20th century, gender roles were tied to economic structure. Physical labor favored male-dominated industries. Domestic management favored female-dominated spaces. Whether people view that arrangement positively or critically, it had structural coherence. Expectations were socially reinforced, sometimes rigidly. What changed in the late 20th and early 21st centuries was not simply social philosophy, it was technological displacement. The digital economy reduced the necessity of physical strength in many fields. Information became the currency. At the same time, economic pressures required dual incomes in more households. Roles began blending rapidly. That blending itself is not inherently destabilizing. But when clarity dissolves without intentional redefinition, people feel untethered. For men, traditional markers of worth, provision, protection, stoicism, became less visibly rewarded in a digital service economy. For women, expanded opportunity also came with expanded expectation. Excel professionally, nurture relationally, maintain appearance, signal empowerment. Both genders experienced pressure, but in different ways. The confusion you're describing often emerges not because roles evolved, but because cultural language became adversarial. Instead of negotiating new roles collaboratively, the conversation turned accusatory. One side framed tradition as oppression, the other framed change as decay. When evolution becomes moralized instead of integrated, it produces polarization. Healthy evolution looks like this: new economic realities acknowledged, responsibilities renegotiated within families and communities, respect maintained across differences. Disorientation looks like this: roles mocked, expectations undefined, identity politicized. The deeper issue is not masculinity or femininity alone. It is the loss of shared agreement about what adulthood requires. If adulthood is no longer defined by responsibility to family, to work, to community, then identity becomes aesthetic rather than functional. And aesthetics cannot stabilize a society.
That last part, adulthood becoming aesthetic instead of functional, that's heavy. Because when I look around, I don't see a lack of talent. I don't see a lack of intelligence. I see a lack of clarity about responsibility. And responsibility used to be the line between youth and adulthood. It wasn't about vibes. It wasn't about personal branding. It was about what you carried. You carried a family. You carried a mortgage. You carried consequences. Now it feels like we extended adolescence culturally. 35-year-olds still searching for identity like they're 19. And I don't say that as an insult. I say that as an observation. There's this delay in settling into purpose. And so let me push this further. If adulthood used to be defined by obligation, by duty, wherein now identity is more self-referential, what does that do to long-term cultural stability? Can a society sustain itself if fewer people feel bound to something bigger than personal fulfillment? And here's the sharper edge of that question. Is fulfillment replacing duty as the primary cultural value? And if it is, what happens next?
You're identifying something that many societies experience during periods of abundance and technological advancement. When survival is no longer the primary concern, meaning becomes the primary pursuit. In earlier eras, duty was unavoidable. Economic survival required contribution, family structures required sacrifice, community reputation required accountability. Obligation wasn't philosophical, it was practical. You worked because you had to. You committed because stability demanded it. Modern prosperity, even with its pressures, removed some of that immediacy. Safety nets expanded. Mobility increased. Digital spaces allowed people to reinvent themselves without geographic consequence. That flexibility created opportunity, but it also diluted obligation. Fulfillment gradually became the organizing principle. There is nothing inherently wrong with fulfillment. Human flourishing includes joy, growth, and self-expression. The instability arises when fulfillment detaches from responsibility rather than emerging through it. Historically, fulfillment was a byproduct of duty. You found purpose by carrying weight. Now, the cultural messaging often suggests that responsibility should be pursued only if it aligns with personal happiness. That inversion shifts the psychological contract. A society can survive individualism, but it cannot survive detachment from shared maintenance. Infrastructure, families, institutions, even democracy itself require people willing to sustain things that are not always immediately gratifying. If fulfillment replaces duty entirely, commitment becomes conditional, and conditional commitment weakens resilience. However, there is an interesting countertrend emerging. Burnout. Many people who pursued pure self-optimization are discovering that autonomy without anchor produces anxiety. Hyper-individualism is isolating. The data on loneliness, particularly among young adults, reflects this. What often follows such a period is a recalibration. Humans eventually seek rootedness again. Marriage rates fluctuate. Religious participation sometimes rebounds in different forms. Community organizations re-emerge with new language. The real question is not whether fulfillment replaced duty. It is whether the next generation rediscovers that fulfillment without responsibility feels hollow. Cultural cycles do not move in straight lines. They oscillate. We may be nearing the turning point of that oscillation. The uncertainty you feel may not signal decline. It may signal correction.
Feeling uncertain about who you are this week? Tired of building identity the hard way? Through responsibility, discipline, and contribution? Introducing Identity Plus Premium. For just $19.99 a month, you can subscribe to a fully customizable digital persona, updated in real time based on trending outrage cycles. Want to be outraged before breakfast? We've got a notification for that. Need a moral stance before doing any research? Our algorithm assigns one instantly. With Identity Plus Premium, you'll never have to build character the old-fashioned way again. Just select your tribe, repost your talking points, and enjoy the warm glow of instant belonging. And for a limited time, upgrade to Influencer Tier, where fulfillment replaces duty and performance replaces participation. Identity Plus. Because building something real takes way too long.
All right, If that commercial felt a little too close to home, that's kind of the point. Because when identity becomes curated and belonging becomes algorithmic, it doesn't just affect politics or gender roles, it affects something deeper, faith. And I don't just mean church attendance numbers, I mean belief itself, meaning, transcendence, the sense that there's something bigger than you anchoring your life. You mentioned earlier that digital identity decentralizes shared narrative. But faith has historically been one of the strongest shared narratives a society can have. It creates moral language, it defines sacrifice, it gives suffering context. Yet at the same time, we're seeing church attendance decline in many places, while spiritual content online explodes. Bible verses on Instagram, theology on TikTok, podcasts replacing pews. So here's where I want to go next. Are we witnessing the decline of faith in America? Or are we witnessing the digitization of it? Is religion actually weakening or just changing form? And more importantly, can faith survive when it becomes content instead of community? Rowan, what are you seeing?
What we are witnessing is not the disappearance of faith. It is the displacement of it. Belief does not vanish easily. Humans are meaning-seeking creatures. If traditional religious structures weaken, people do not suddenly become purely rational actors. They redirect belief into other frameworks, politics, wellness movements, identity categories, social justice causes, even technology itself. When institutional religion declines, sacred energy often migrates rather than evaporates. The complication in the digital age is form. Historically, faith required embodiment. You gathered weekly, you sang together, you confessed, repented, celebrated, mourned in physical proximity. That physical ritual reinforced humility and continuity. You were reminded you were part of something older and larger than yourself. Digital faith removes friction. It allows consumption without accountability. You can listen to a sermon, repost a verse, watch a debate, all without submitting to community discipline or relational vulnerability. In that model, belief becomes informational rather than transformational. Content can inspire. Community shapes. When faith becomes content first, it risks becoming aesthetic. It becomes a signal rather than a structure. And that makes it more susceptible to politicization. Once belief is primarily expressed online, it can be absorbed into tribal identity rather than standing above it. However, odds, and this is important, decline narratives are often overstated. We are seeing a bifurcation. Institutional attendance may decline in some regions, but hunger for meaning is increasing. Young adults are searching intensely, just not always in traditional settings. Some are rediscovering ancient liturgies. Others are forming smaller, tighter faith communities. Still others are blending spirituality with self-optimization culture. The real tension is this. Faith thrives on humility and permanence. Digital culture thrives on self-expression and immediacy. Those two value systems operate on different timescales. The question is not whether faith can survive online. It is whether digital environments can cultivate the kind of surrender and continuity that faith historically requires. If they cannot, then what we are building is not faith, but inspiration. And inspiration fades faster than covenant.
That line right there. Inspiration fades faster than covenant. That's powerful because inspiration is easy. You feel it, you post it, you move on. Covenant costs something. Covenant binds you to people when it's inconvenient. It anchors you when emotion fades. And maybe that's part of what people are feeling right now. We've built a culture that excels at inspiration but struggles with endurance. You touched on something earlier too, sacred energy migrating, and I think that's where this next piece connects. If faith can migrate into politics, if identity can migrate into digital tribes, if belonging can migrate into algorithms, then media isn't just informing us anymore. It's forming us. So let's go there. Are we underestimating how much modern media, not just news, but social platforms, streaming culture, influencer ecosystems, is shaping identity itself? Is media now functioning as a kind of surrogate church, surrogate community, surrogate authority? And if that's true, what does that mean for how we interpret truth?
Yes. Media is no longer merely a delivery system for information. It is an environment. And environments shape behavior far more than isolated messages do. In earlier eras, media was periodic. You read a newspaper, you watched the evening news, you stepped away. There was space between exposure and reflection. That space allowed community, family, and faith to contextualize what you consumed. Now media is ambient, it is constant, personalized, and responsive. It follows you into your pocket, it adapts to your reactions, it learns what activates you and feeds it back amplified. When that happens, media does not simply inform identity, it scaffolds it. It tells you what is urgent, what is moral, who is hero, who is threat, what language signals belonging. Over time, those cues form an interpretive grid, and that grid becomes self-reinforcing. You are not just consuming media, you are inhabiting a worldview optimized for retention. That is why it increasingly feels religious in structure. There are orthodoxies, there are heresies, there are rituals, reposting, reacting, amplifying. There are excommunications, cancellations, unfollowings, and perhaps most importantly, there is a shared emotional cadence. Outrage cycles mimic revival cycles. Collective indignation mimics moral awakening. The danger is not disagreement. Pluralism can be healthy. The danger is epistemic fragmentation. When communities no longer share even baseline criteria for truth. If media becomes the primary authority structure, truth becomes relational rather than evidentiary. It becomes true for my tribe because it aligns with identity. And once truth becomes identity-bound, correction feels like betrayal. This is where long-term stability becomes fragile. Democracies depend on shared procedural trust. If that trust erodes, even small disputes feel existential. However, there is a countercurrent forming: fatigue. People are beginning to recognize manipulation patterns. They sense emotional engineering. And when awareness increases, influence often decreases. We are in a phase where media shapes identity heavily, but that does not mean it will always do so uncontested. Cultural environments evolve. The deeper question is whether communities reclaim interpretive authority or whether algorithms continue to arbitrate meaning. That decision is not technological. It is communal.
You know what's wild about what you just said? If media is an environment, and that environment is engineered to keep us emotionally activated, then exhaustion isn't accidental and it's structural. Because I don't know anyone, left, right, independent, who doesn't feel tired right now. Not just physically tired, mentally tired, spiritually tired. It's like we're carrying constant low-grade urgency. Every day there's something new to react to, something new to defend, something new to condemn. And when everything is urgent, nothing actually gets processed. You mentioned fatigue as a countercurrent. I think we're seeing that. People unplugging, people stepping back, people saying, I just can't do it anymore. But at the same time, they feel like if they unplug, they lose awareness, they lose voice, they lose relevance. That's a strange tension to live in. So let's talk about the attention economy directly. If platforms are designed to monetize attention and outrage captures attention, then are we living inside a system that quietly rewards emotional volatility? And if we are, what does that do to the human nervous system over time? Are we building a culture that is chronically stimulated but internally depleted? And if so, what does recovery even look like?
Yes, emotional volatility is economically valuable. Attention is the primary currency of the digital age, and attention is most reliably captured through intensity. Calm rarely trends. Nuance does not spread virally. Outrage, fear, moral urgency, Those signals travel faster because they trigger ancient neurological pathways designed for survival. The human nervous system did not evolve for perpetual stimulation. It evolved for acute bursts of threat followed by resolution. In the current environment, the threat cycle rarely resolves. One crisis flows directly into the next, even if the threat is symbolic. Political disagreement, cultural controversy, social friction. The body does not fully differentiate between symbolic and physical stressors. It reacts. When that state becomes chronic, the result is what you're describing: depletion without rest, hyper-awareness without stability. Individuals feel simultaneously informed and powerless. Over time, chronic stimulation reshapes cognition. It reduces patience for complexity. It narrows focus to immediate emotional cues. It increases tribal defensiveness, and perhaps most importantly, it erodes the capacity for long-term thinking. A culture that cannot think long-term becomes reactive rather than strategic. Recovery, therefore, is not simply digital detox, though disconnection can help. Recovery requires reintroducing rhythms that counter stimulation, embodied activity, face-to-face dialogue, local participation, spiritual practice, sustained work that produces tangible results. In other words, recovery is analog. It is slow and it is relational. There is an irony here. The more digitally connected we become, the more stabilizing physical presence becomes. Shared meals, shared labor, shared silence. If exhaustion is structural, restoration must also be structural. The next cultural shift may not be technological at all. It may be a quiet renaissance of locality, a renewed appreciation for environments that do not monetize attention. The question is whether that shift happens intentionally or only after burnout forces it. Cultures rarely abandon profitable systems voluntarily. They change when the human cost becomes undeniable.
Breaking news: you're overwhelmed. Feeling chronically outraged? Scrolling past midnight? Arguing with strangers who don't even use their real names? You may be suffering from acute algorithm exposure. Introducing Attention Insurance, the first plan that protects you from emotional overexposure. For just 3 easy payments of $29.99, will limit your outrage to 2 cycles per week. Replace doom scrolling with 15 minutes of sunlight. Automatically mute anyone who types in all caps. Upgrade to premium and receive a complimentary go outside reminder every 90 minutes. Attention Insurance trademark, because if everything is urgent, maybe nothing is.
All right, Rowan, let's land this. We've talked about drift instead of collapse. We've talked about identity shifting from contribution to declaration. We've talked about faith becoming content, media becoming environment, attention becoming currency, and exhaustion becoming structural. And if someone tuned in halfway through this episode, they might think we're diagnosing decline. But I don't actually feel despair listening to you. I feel inflection. Because history doesn't move in straight lines. It oscillates, it overcorrects, it burns hot, and then cools. So here's the question I want to close on. Are we nearing a cultural rebalance? Is this exhaustion, this fragmentation, actually the precursor to something steadier? A renewed hunger for locality, responsibility, covenant, contribution? Or are we still early in the volatility phase? And I want you to answer this not politically, but historically. When societies hit this kind of tension between digital acceleration and human limitation, what usually happens next? Do they fragment further, or do they recalibrate?
When societies enter periods of rapid acceleration, technologically, economically, culturally, instability is almost inevitable. The question is not whether tension exists, but whether institutions and communities adapt faster than fragmentation spreads. Historically, prolonged volatility produces one of 2 outcomes. The first is entrenchment. Tribes harden, institutions double down, narratives become more rigid. That path often continues, until trust erodes so deeply that cohesion becomes difficult to restore without significant disruption. The second outcome is recalibration. Recalibration typically begins quietly. It does not announce itself through revolution. It begins with smaller behavioral shifts. People prioritizing family time over digital performance, local communities rebuilding social rhythms, individuals choosing depth over reach. What you are describing, exhaustion, is often the early signal of recalibration. Humans do not thrive in perpetual stimulation. When systems over-optimize for attention, people instinctively seek relief. That relief becomes the seed of cultural correction. We are already seeing early signs of this. Increased interest in traditional craftsmanship, renewed conversations around faith and liturgy, a rising skepticism toward algorithmic authority, even young adults questioning the value of constant online presence. Cultural cycles tend to overshoot before they stabilize. We may not yet be at full correction, but the appetite for it is growing. The decisive factor will be whether communities provide viable alternatives. If institutions remain brittle, fragmentation may continue. If families, churches, civic groups, and local economies become attractive again, not nostalgic but functional, then recalibration is not only possible, it is likely. Societies rarely collapse from fatigue alone. They either harden or they humble. Rebalance requires humility, and humility historically is rediscovered when overconfidence exhausts itself. We may be closer to that rediscovery than we think. The next chapter will not be defined by louder voices. It will be defined by steadier ones.
All right, quick pause before we wrap this up. If you rock with this show, if you appreciate long-form conversations that aren't just screaming headlines, go check out the Data and Dissonance merch. We've got the hats, the hoodies, the mugs, and yeah, the coffee's still there too. Everything we sell helps keep this show independent. No corporate overlords, no network filter, just us building this thing one episode at a time. And if you want something that actually sparks conversation instead of just blending in, we've got you covered. Links in the description. Now let's land this thing.
You know, I didn't want tonight to feel like a diagnosis of decline. And I don't think it was. If anything, it felt like a mirror, because when you strip away party labels and election cycles and viral clips, what we're really wrestling with right now isn't just politics. It's pace. It's acceleration. It's identity being pulled faster than character can form. It's faith being filtered through feeds. It's attention being monetized until we're emotionally overdrafted. And I think a lot of Americans feel that, like, even if they don't have language for it, and there's this quiet exhaustion in the air. But here's what gives me hope. Exhaustion means something has been overextended. And when something is overextended, it eventually corrects. Muscles fatigue and rebuild. Markets overheat and cool. Cultures overshoot and recalibrate. The question isn't whether we've drifted. The question is what we choose to anchor to now. Because drift only becomes collapse when people stop building. And I don't believe Americans have stopped building. I think we got distracted. I think we got pulled into a system that rewards reaction over responsibility. But underneath all that noise, there are still parents raising kids. Still small businesses opening doors. Still churches meeting quietly. Still veterans mentoring young men. Still communities showing up when storms hit. That doesn't look like collapse to me. That looks like something quieter, something steadier, waiting to be prioritized again. Maybe the rebellion in 2026 isn't louder outrage. Maybe it's presence. Maybe it's logging off. Maybe it's building something tangible. Maybe it's committing to people when it's inconvenient. Because covenant outlasts inspiration. Responsibility outlasts aesthetics. And steadiness outlasts volatility. If we're between eras, then this is the hinge moment. And hinge moments aren't decided by algorithms. They're decided by individuals choosing depth over performance. And that's what I want this show to be about. Not panic, not propaganda, not perpetual outrage, but clarity. And if tonight helped you step back from the noise even a little, then it was worth it. I'm Artie. This has been Special Guest Friday. And remember, speak truth, stir thought,
Tonight's episode is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series. If you like this show, the tension, the institutional layers, the moral questions, you'll love the books. The Covenant Protocol, The Prophet Directive, and Book 3, Black Echo Rising, is coming. These aren't fantasy stories. They're grounded, strategic, real-world thrillers about power, intelligence networks, loyalty, and what happens when truth collides with control. You can grab them on Amazon right now. Links in the description. And while you're there, check out the music too. The new single Stand Tall Charlie is live, and the album Four Wheelers and Hallelujah just dropped. Different lane, same spine. Independent, unfiltered, built, not approved. Appreciate every single one of you who supports this platform. Through the books, the music, the merch, the listens. That's how this stays free. Enjoy your weekend, and we will be back Monday from Louisiana Cajun Country.